Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the December 2nd meeting, City of Lebanon's Board of Zoning Appeals. Can we have roll call, please?
Sure. Gordon Perry.
Here.
Bruce Polly.
Here.
Ron Edwards.
Here.
Chad Kiger.
Here.
And Lori Gross.
Here.
Okay, we have everybody here tonight. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to look at them? Okay, on the third page, the very first sentence, it said Gordon Perry opened a hearing up to the public. Should have been myself, Bruce Pauly. I think that's the only change that we just need to note, I think. Any other questions? Okay, that being said, I would like a second, or a motion, please.
Motion to approve the minutes with the correction.
And need a second.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, well, before I forget it, I want to congratulate Western Boone for their second in a row state basketball or football tournament, their championship, and I think they can do it again next year. Next item on the agenda will be the election of officers for the 2020 year. I would, anybody want to nominate anybody or any suggestions?
I would nominate you to continue on, Bruce.
Anybody else? Okay, I guess need a second. Okay,
He seconded.
okay, we already got the second, okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so I will be the head next year again, chairman. We need a vice chairman. Any suggestions?
Ron?
Okay, Lori.
I nominate Gordon.
I have to, I won't be able to
That's
do
what I
that.
didn't know.
Yeah, I won't be able to do that with an impending move coming up from the Lebanon area.
Want to nominate somebody else?
I nominate Chad.
Okay,
Second?
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, Chad, you are the vice chairman, and now we have to have the secretary, and I would suggest that we retain Kelly as the secretary.
Second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Okay, that was quick and easy. We have election of officers for next year. I will be your chairman. Chad will be the vice chairman. Kelly stays on as secretary. Next item is the agenda for next year. And I looked at it and don't see any changes. The only thing that is caught this year is the April meeting, which is moved back 1 week.
Yeah, it does not affect spring break this next year.
Right. So, does anybody have any questions on that? Is everybody okay with that? Let's go with the motion again.
Make a motion to approve the 2020 meeting agenda for BZA.
Second.
And we got a second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay. That's all taken care of. Now we can get down to the old business. And this is a public meeting, and everybody will get a chance to speak at some point. We will limit the public end of it to 3 minutes per person. Appreciate it if you could hold to that. And also, if you plan on speaking tonight, need you to sign in over here. And the first item of old business is continued from the November 4th meeting, docket number 19-32, Tom and Diana Bersuti, requesting a development standard variance to allow a privacy fence to be constructed in a front yard. The property is located at 704 East Street here in Lebanon. The property is zoned multifamily. And Ben, you want to take over?
Very good. Good evening, BZA. I'll just walk you through some of the history of this property and the request tonight. Property is located at 704 South East Street. It is on a corner lot. So if they could pull up the overhead here, I can show you a little bit of the physical situation here on the property. Is it not? I'm looking for the overhead right now. Yeah. Is this one not working either? No. Okay. Got to wake up the overhead first. So as I said, this is a corner lot, and we'll get the overhead up here in a second. We were notified by a call from a citizen that there was a fence being constructed on this property. As you see here, this is the corner lot. So just off the aerial to the east is East Street, and then this area here is Sycamore Street. So they are on two public street frontages. As y'all know, our fence standards only allow a fence in a front yard to be 42 inches tall and 50% opaque. In this case, because you're on a corner lot, by definition of the UDO, this property has two road frontages or two front yards that are restricted to that fence height. We were notified that a fence had been constructed on this property. It's a 6-foot tall privacy fence. We went out and did an investigation, and the fence, I'll draw it here on show you with my pen. It starts around the front corner of the house. It comes out towards Sycamore Street. It runs along the property line here, and then makes this angle by the driveway and comes along the driveway. So the fence is located technically by UDO state definition, in the front yard on Sycamore Street. We had notified the property owner. We've had some conversations with them, and they informed me that they would like to keep the fence in its current physical location and its current physical form, if at all possible. So the variance request that they're making tonight is to be able to maintain this 6-foot tall privacy fence located in the front yard on Sycamore Street in its current physical form and current physical location. I did go out and investigate the property, and actually if they'll pull up the computer screen now, I'll show you a couple of photos so you can kind of see what the fence looks like in its physical location. Hopefully the computer will work. Maybe it won't. It's acting like it's not even. See, normally the screen flashes after it plugs in, like it's recognized it. We'll go old school on the overhead if we have to. You won't be able to see it quite as well, but. All right, we'll bring the overhead back up instead because the computer's not cooperating this evening. So you can see here, this is a picture.
Would these 11 to 17s help you out at all?
I think this is coming in, this gives you an
Okay.
idea of what we're seeing here. This is standing in the middle of Sycamore Street, looking out towards East Street, where the truck is parked as their driveway. And you can see the fence runs along the property line out towards East Street. This other image here is standing out the corner of Sycamore and East Street, looking back towards the fence, as you can see it running along the front corner of the house. I do have another image I was going to pull up on the computer, but it shows that the fence in its current location does not affect the visibility out at the intersection at all. You can pull at least one, if not two cars up in a line and be able to see down East Street, so it's not causing any issues with sight and visibility as you're turning the corner. So there's no issue with that. This is really just a request for front yard. So one thing that I did note is that one somewhat unique situation here, while Sycamore Street is identified as a public street, its physical conditions are more like an alley. It is 14 feet wide. Most of the alleys in the city are 10 to 12 feet. So its physical form is closer to an alley than it is a street. So if this were an alley, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. The fence would be permitted in this location if this were an alley rather than a street. So this is in a situation where it is a dedicated public street, but its physical form is more that of an alley. Just walking through the three statutory required criteria that are required to be met in order to approve a variance. Approval not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. Staff has indicated that this poses no imminent threat to public health, safety, morals, or general welfare. While the fence is located in the front yard along the property line adjacent to Sycamore Street, its location causes no visibility issues at the intersection. In terms of the use and the value of the area adjacent to the property, would not be affected in a substantially adverse manner, and staff determined the use and value of the area would not be affected. The fence is constructed of quality materials, and its location in no way inhibits the expected use of any adjacent property. Criteria number 3 is a strict application of the terms of the UDO will result in practical difficulties in the use of the property. And staff determined that strict application would result in practical difficulties because it's a corner lot with 2 front yards. The property has additional restrictions than a typical residential lot. While Sycamore Street is technically a public street, it operates more like an alley, as it is only 14 feet wide, only slightly wider than many alleys in the city. If this was an alley rather than a public street, the fence would be permitted in its current location. That being said, because the fence is located directly on the property line and only a few feet from the edge of street pavement, it would be most appropriate to reduce the height of the fence to more closely match the UDO requirements. So in this case, staff has recommended approval of the development standard variance request to permit a wooden privacy fence located in the front yard, subject to the following condition. And that is that the applicant would reduce the height of the fence by creating a scalloped top between fence posts such that the lowest point between posts is no more than 54 inches. This reduction shall include the fence panels directly adjacent to Sycamore Street and the angled section by the driveway. And I do have an example, if they want to pull up the overhead one more time, of a fence with a scalloped top. So at least have a general idea of what we're talking about. This is a 6-foot tall privacy fence, but the overall height has been reduced between the posts, so its impact to the sidewalk has been reduced. So the applicant has requested to keep the fence in its current form. Staff has placed one condition that they would scallop the fence to reduce the height and the impact, the visible impact from the street. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Would it be appropriate to put a time frame on that?
We can
condition
do
number
that.
one.
Just knowing we're coming up on winter time, I would like to give them time in the spring to get it done when the weather's a little more appropriate. So I'd be okay with 6 months to get that done.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. Would the applicant please step forward and speak a little bit about it? Yes, please.
Okay,
Just,
what do you want to know?
well, just, I don't know, a little bit.
State your name and
Your
address.
name and address, start with.
My name's Tom Persutti, my wife Diana, and we live at 704 Southeast Street here in Lebanon.
Okay. Just, do you have any concerns about, or not concerns, but can you?
No, I don't. Like I told Ben, if you guys want us to do the scallop, we'll do the scallop, but obviously we'd like to keep it as it is, but I think with what you're trying to do in the city, we'd be more than happy conform some way. I don't want to tear down half the fence to do the 50% thing or tear it down to 42 inches either. So I think what Ben has recommended for the scallop and the height is proper for what we'd like to do.
Okay, any questions?
Tom, I do have one. In looking at the fence, it appears to be kind of a shadow box, so there's pickets on both
Yes,
sides.
Shadow box.
And having built these myself, I mean, to put the scallops in, it just seemed like a lot of work.
It is. It will be.
Okay. I would like to remind the fellow committee members that there was a letter sent to us from a neighbor that was complimentary of what Tom and his wife have already built as it is today. Thank you, Tom.
Do you have a entrance to your home?
Pardon?
Do you have an entrance to your home off of Sycamore Street?
An interest?
Entrance,
Entrance to
like a
off
front
of
door?
Sycamore
Or
Street? No,
if I were standing on Sycamore Street, would it look like I was looking at the front of your house?
no, side of the house.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we were completely unaware of the alley, two front yards.
I live on a corner too, and one side of my house doesn't look like the front of my house.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
There's a public meeting. Does anybody from the audience care to address the issue? Well, I need to open the public hearing. So if anybody wants to address the issue, please come forward. Seeing nobody coming forward, we will close the public hearing. And does the board have anything else to?
I have a question for Ben.
Okay.
Okay, so we're dropping this down to 54 inches, and I guess I'm kind of confused why. What are we accomplishing there?
Well, certainly, I mean, if they were to meet the requirement, it would need to be 42 inches. So we're trying to
Right,
find
right.
a little bit of common ground in the middle somewhere where we're trying to reduce the visible impact of the fence from the street, at the same time allowing them to keep some of the height that they already have. So this would be, I know it is going to take some work, certainly with this type of fence
Right.
to reduce the height, but it still would be easier than trying to cut the whole thing down to 42 inches in this location. And it's also much easier than trying to move the fence to where it would be permitted. They've got some, you can kind of see it, well, I guess you couldn't see in the picture because we couldn't get the computer to work, but they do have several trees in that side yard and a couple of shrubs that you just about have to cut all of them in half to fit the fence in that location. So from a physical perspective, it would be hard for them to meet that requirement without completely altering the use of their backyard. So it made more sense to try to find some sort of happy medium with the fence in its current location. And the other thing that I look at is if there's been any precedent set by the BZA historically for this sort of request. There have been a handful of variances that have been approved to allow the fence in the front yard, but none of them approved the fence all the way to the street like this. There was always some location in between, like it was 5 feet off the property line between the house and the street or something like that. So that was one other thing that I looked for to see whether there had been any precedent set with this type of request.
Has this been surveyed?
It has not.
There wouldn't be any problem though if this was an alley instead of a street.
If this was an alley, the fence would be permitted at that location.
Ben, across the alley, in the pictures that were provided with our packet, not necessarily what you're showing on the screen, I see other fences of this nature, the full 6-foot height.
So across the alley, that fence follows the line of the garage, which is part of the house. So technically, that is not located in its front yard, even though it's closer to the street, because
Right.
the house in that case is actually closer. Actually, if you look at the air photography, it looks like the garage is in the alley right away, but it's probably right on it. So because of the placement of the house over there, they could follow that line and meet the requirement because it's not in the front yard. It follows the line of the house. And there is one other, if you look behind them, I think there's another house behind them on Sycamore. They did a 6-foot privacy fence that followed the house, but then they put a shorter fence out towards the street. So they did do something a little bit different back there.
Does this set, I know it'll set a precedent for others to follow, but it's not an automatic, they would each have to come?
Yeah, unless we change the ordinance, everybody would have to come with a request. So we'd be looking at this specific scenario, if there's something, again, unique about this situation that is unlike another property that's in the same corner lot situation that would suggest that perhaps this could be approved in some form or fashion. So the one item that I mentioned is, while this is a public street, effectively, it's no more than an alley. So that is one unique scenario here, but even at that, in order just to reduce the impact, the visual impact, I felt like it was appropriate to ask them to scallop that fence.
Thank you, Ben.
Okay, any other questions? Entertain a motion, please. Okay, I got one question, Ben.
Sure.
Are we, the 50% part of it, we are not worried about tonight?
I didn't address that. It's certainly something that we could look at, but in this case, the fence doesn't affect the visibility. Where I'm concerned about is when you get out by the street at the intersection with East Street, and where the fence location does nothing to affect your visibility out by the street. The house is set back off the street a little bit. If it were closer and it was closer to the intersection, I'd be a little bit more concerned about that, but this fence does nothing to obstruct visibility out there where it would be a safety concern for me. So I don't think that that's something I'm terribly concerned about because it doesn't necessarily affect safety on the street.
Okay. Still looking for a motion.
I'll make a motion that, for docket 1932, that we approve the variance request without the condition.
Second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Kelly?
Gordon Perry?
I'll make sure I understand the motion in the second. Without the condition, as is, correct? Yes.
Bruce Polly?
No.
Ron Edwards?
Yes.
Chad Kiger?
Yes.
Lori Gross?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Congratulations. Okay, the next item is, was a continued item, docket 1936. Joe Blake for the Iron Mine Properties of Lebanon. Property is located at 315 North Lebanon Street in Lebanon. Property is zoned central business and within the downtown overlay district and comprised of approximately 9/10 of an acre. Ben?
All right, I'll give a quick recap since we spent a little bit of time on this last month as well. This is a use variance request. The Memory Hall apartments were originally constructed as a federal tax credit project for restricted to low-income seniors. And that restriction was in place while the tax credits were in place. In, 2013, that property fell into bankruptcy, and as a result of that bankruptcy, that restriction was lifted. The federal restriction was lifted. However, locally, our UDO allows senior housing in the central business district, but it only allows your typical multifamily apartment on upper floors of multi-story buildings. So because this is not a multi-story building with retail on the first floor, because it physically can't be that, they are requesting a use variance to allow a shift from senior housing to just a traditional multifamily housing type of product. So this would be essentially leasable to anybody, rather than being restricted to seniors. The last month, there was a question brought up in the public hearing about a decision that may or may not have been made as far back as the mid-90s regarding the gymnasium. There was some question brought up about whether there was a requirement to provide parking spaces specific to the use of the gymnasium outside of the residential and at that time commercial uses. So I was able to find, and actually I think I put, it was during the September 1994 Plan Commission meeting, the Lebanon Plan Commission meeting. The applicant was Leo Stentz, who owned the property at the time. And there was discussion about the parking spaces were being provided. At that time, they had 59 residential units, and they had 5,000 square feet of office space in the building. I think it actually ended up becoming a fitness center and a karate studio for a period of time. So there was a requirement that during that where they discussed providing the number of spaces required for those residential units and then also providing parking spaces for the office commercial space. So there were 30 required for the residential units. There were 25 required for the office space for a total of 55 required, and there were 76 spaces provided. At this Plan Commission meeting, they were making a request for a variance so that they would not have to provide parking specific to the gymnasium. So that because they did not have the number required to meet the requirement for the gymnasium. So at that meeting, again, September 1994, there was a variance approved that eliminated the parking requirement for the gymnasium. That variance runs with the land. It's not specific to a property owner, so that variance is still in place for that gymnasium. The difference here is that rather than having 59 units, we have 67 units, so there are more residential units. But what has happened is since the applicant purchased the property, they have transitioned that office commercial space to additional residential units. So the 25 spaces that were required for the commercial office space, that goes away because there is no commercial office space anymore. They have 67 residential units rather than 59. So my parking calculation I did for the meeting last time, there were 82 spaces required of the residential units, which at this point, the residential units would be the only thing required to provide parking because the commercial office is not there anymore, and the gymnasium received a variance, so they would not have to provide parking. The total space required is 82, and there are 73 currently provided. I did make an error that was brought to my attention earlier today in my calculation. In addition to the spaces that were required for the residential units, there is also an additional requirement that you provide an additional one space for every 7 units to address guest parking. So if you add in that calculation, you've got 67 units divided by 7, multiplied by 50%, the reduction for the downtown, that would equate to an additional 5 parking spaces. So in this case, they would be required to provide an additional 14 spaces rather than 9 spaces I had outlined in the staff report. So rather than going through all the details on the findings of fact again, I'll just note that they're in the staff report for the record because we went through those last time. And staff recommendation is we recommend approval of the variance of use request to permit multifamily housing within the Central Business District zoning classification, subject to these 2 conditions. 1, that the approval of the variance of use is limited to those multifamily uses proposed by the applicant. Any change in use or increase in the intensity of the use, such as increasing the number of units by the current or any subsequent owners, will require review and approval by the City of Lebanon Board of Zoning Appeals. And 2, that the applicant install the additional required parking spaces, in this case 14 total required, on the vacant lot on North Lebanon Street, meeting all applicable development standards prior to the conversion of units in Memory Hall. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Ben, we talked about that area on that vacant lot on Lebanon Street. That was going to be deeded or easement of some kind so that it would follow with the land. That's part of what you're...
Yes, yeah, I think actually that was a discussion with the applicant the last time, is there would be some sort of restriction placed on it, so those 14 spaces in this case would always be available to Memory Hall and or the Flats project.
Not dependent on what may or may not get developed on that space, right? Those 14
Yeah.
are going to go with what?
They will always be available to the Flats Memory Hall. So if there were something developed on the remainder of that property, they would have to meet the parking requirements for that new use and also maintain the 14 parking spaces that we're requiring here.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ben? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Would the applicant care to step forward? Need you to come up and give your name and so forth. Thank you.
You're welcome. My name is Joe Blake with Ironman Properties. I have no comments beyond what I had communicated to you all last month, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Do I have any questions? Okay, thank you. This is a public meeting. I will open it up to the public. Give you, pardon me?
The public hearings.
Yeah, public hearing, open it up to the public, and give you 3 minutes to speak, and at 2 minutes and 45 seconds, I'll remind you, you got 15 seconds to go. Anybody care to come forward?
Paul Van Clay, 404 North Meridian. I still think there's a misunderstanding between the office space and the gymnasium. It was, the office space would use it during the day and the gymnasium at night. Right now, we're using the gymnasium and the apartments there at the same time. It's just, it's beyond my comprehension that a city would allow an occupied space like a gymnasium. There was an event Saturday there. There was cars coming looking for spaces. There's spaces along Meridian Street, which are nearly half the sizes they're supposed to be. You talked about safety with a fence on the previous issue, and is it safe to go in and out? It's not safe to back out of those parking spaces. People don't use the parking spaces. Saturday night, I went to use my car. I had this car parked, blocking mine in. Parked on where the city is parked, or painted yellow stripes. Here's another picture. That's my car. With this car parked here, I can't get out. That was Saturday night. Sunday, I come home from lunch. Here's a little quiz for you. How many box trucks do you see? I went to come down Meridian Street. This car was parked here, unloading and delivering a TV. Didn't take just 2 or 3 minutes. It was there over 15 minutes. So instead of coming down Meridian Street, I went through the alley and came this way. There's a box truck here. There's no parking at that facility.
Thank you. Anybody else care to speak? Okay, we'll close the public end of the hearing. Board have any?
A question for Ben in staff recommendations.
Yes, sir.
In item number 2, still reads that a total of 9 are required, but now we're up to 14.
Yes, yeah. There was, I had made an error in the calculation. It was brought to my attention today, so it was after I had sent the reports out. I wouldn't have had time to get it to you in time for the meeting. So with the additional calculation for the guest parking spaces, one space per every 7 units, it adds 5 to that number. So the requirement would be to add additional 14 spaces on that North Lebanon Street lot.
Okay. In addition to that, is there anything, Ben, in the city code ordinances that takes into account this gymnasium and activities? Is that something that we're accountable, we, the city, are accountable for, or is that something that's part of the development of that property?
That type of use by our ordinance would be required parking for use of that event space. However, with that variance that was approved in 1994, they're not required to provide parking for the gymnasium.
It wasn't for apartments.
The apartments, there were 59 apartments, and there was office space that has been converted to apartments now, so they are required to provide parking for those 67 spaces. The gymnasium received a variance that eliminated the parking requirement for the gymnasium, and that runs with the land. So the use of the gymnasium hasn't necessarily changed from that. The use of the remainder of the building has, so we calculate the parking
And we're
spaces.
accounting for, and your calculations account for that change in the office space to apartments?
Correct.
Which increases the number of spaces needed based on the use of that part of the building.
Correct.
But the variance of 94 is still current, where it was, the variance was passed by the BZA and adopted by the city, that there was not a need for parking.
That's correct.
And that variance runs with the
It
land.
runs with the land. It's not specific to a property owner.
Thank you, Ben.
Any other questions?
I understand the gentleman that spoke before that, there's not the truck, there's no one that can cure that.
Yeah, well, the only thing I could
There's
have,
no place for it to go.
sorry.
The meeting, your public end is closed, please.
So if there is a car that's parked in an illegal space or a truck that's blocking a street, I would suggest any citizen of the community to call the police department and have them address the issue. It's not something, it's on a public street, the BZA can't legislate the use of the public street. There are ordinances that address parking, illegal parking on public streets that are enforced by the police department.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I'd entertain a motion.
Pertaining to docket 1936, I recommend approval of the variance of use request to permit multifamily housing within the central business zoning classification, subject to the following conditions: that the approval of the variance is limited to those multifamily uses proposed by the applicant. Any change in use or increase in the intensity of the use, such as increasing the number of units by the current or any subsequent owners, will require review and approval by the City of Lebanon Board of Zoning Appeals. Number two, that the applicant install the additional required spaces, 14 total, on the vacant lot on North Lebanon Street, meeting all applicable development standards prior to the conversion of units in Memory Hall.
Could I have a second, please?
Second.
Okay, Kelly?
Gordon Perry,
Aye.
Bruce Pauly,
Aye.
Ron Edwards.
Aye.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Motion carried. Congratulations. Next item up is the Menards property, which is docket number 1938. They have asked to continue it until the December meeting.
January meeting.
January meeting? Okay, sorry. This is December, isn't it? About gone already. Hadn't even started yet. Okay, so it will, Menards will be continued to the December meeting,
January meeting.
January meeting.
Try it again.
We're not gonna
Unless
do
you
it
want to hold
again.
a special meeting later this month, but I didn't think that was.
Okay, well, let's just go to docket 1939. How's that sound? This property is located at 1501 Indianapolis Avenue, zoned PBC, It's in the thoroughfare overlay district and comprises of 6.8 acres. Ben?
All right. Unfortunately, the computer's not working, and I printed these out in black and white, so you're not gonna be able to see it very well. But we'll give it a shot. Wasn't anticipating using these. You have a color one, maybe we'll go with the color. We'll be able to see this a little bit better. Aside from the glare. All right. So before you tonight at 1501 Indianapolis Avenue, that is currently the location of the Reynolds Farm Equipment dealership, which, as you all know, is moving further south on Indianapolis Avenue. Their building is currently under construction. This property has been for sale for a period of time. If you recall, we did have an applicant come in for a variance of use a few months ago to do a trailer sales and service operation here. And as you probably will also recall, they found another site that suits their needs a little bit better and just got a variance of use approved, it was, I believe, just a month ago to move further south in the community. So this property is again available, and this is actually the second time around for this application. It didn't make it to your agenda last time, but this is the second time around for this application in our office. The Boone REMC's property is underneath what's shown as the glare here, further north on Indianapolis Avenue. They have their main office and then also a storage yard where they keep a lot of their equipment, their trucks. They stage their trucks back there. They have the poles and the cabinets and everything back there in a fenced-in storage yard. What they're intending to do here is purchase this property and initially expand their storage yard to include the back, about 2/3 of this property. Essentially everything you see behind this building here towards the back of the property would be expanded storage yard for their use. They do theoretically intend maybe in the future to expand their operations into those other buildings as they grow, but at this current time, what they're requesting is to allow them to use this back 2/3 of the property as a storage yard. And because this is in both the Planned Business Commercial Zoning District and in the Thoroughfare Overlay District, outdoor storage is not permitted. So their request to allow outdoor storage would require the variance of use that's before you tonight. I don't think they'll let the applicant talk a little bit how they intend to use the property. My understanding is they're going to expand and they'll do equipment storage, material storage, they'll stage trucks there for the day and all that good stuff. Walk through the findings of fact really quickly. Criteria number 1, approval will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. Staff finds that the variance of use to permit outdoor storage will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. The proposed use is similar and complementary to many other industrial uses on this corridor. Criteria number 2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. The requested use variance would not affect the use and value of the area adjacent in a substantially adverse manner. The proposed use is similar to the current use of the property and many of the neighboring properties. In terms of visibility from Indianapolis Avenue, staff would recommend the combination of a screening fence or wall and significant landscaping in order to minimize any potential aesthetic impact to the thoroughfare. Criteria number 3, the need for the variance arises from some condition peculiar to the property involved. The property has historically been used for a variety of businesses, but most recently houses a business selling farm equipment, particularly larger equipment that are stored outside on a primarily gravel lot to the back of the property. At this point, not particularly screened at all from the street. The improvements to the site that are being proposed the improvements to the site are specifically designed for such businesses or similar types of equipment, making it more difficult to accommodate a more traditional commercial or retail use. Criteria number 4, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will constitute an unnecessary hardship if applied to the property. The Indianapolis Avenue corridor includes a variety of retail, commercial, and industrial uses, regardless of the zoning district assigned to the property. The proposed use is complementary to the variety of uses in this area, and applying the strict terms of the UDO would limit the use of the property. And criteria number 5, the approval does not interfere substantially with the City of Lebanon Comprehensive Plan. Currently, the plan designates this property for mixed-use, commercial, industrial, and the proposed land use would be permitted with an industrial zoning classification. This request would not interfere substantially with the comprehensive plan. So with that, to summarize, this City of Lebanon planning staff recommends approval of the variance of use request to permit outdoor storage of contractors' equipment and inventory within the planned business commercial zoning classification subject to the following conditions. One, that the approval of the variance of use is limited to the outdoor storage uses proposed by the applicant. Any change in use or increase in the intensity of use by the current or any subsequent owners will require approval by the City of Lebanon Board of Zoning Appeals. Number two, that the applicant completely encloses the outdoor storage yard with a minimum 8-foot tall opaque fence or wall that meets all applicable standards for non-residential fences. And I think, again, that it kind of depends on how they expand their storage yard. There's a couple of different scenarios, one where they expand across the back of their property, include this all in one large area, or where they would just enclose this one separately, but we would like to see that fence enclose the entire area on all four sides of that property. Number three, that the applicant installs a landscape buffer along the west side of the proposed storage yard, the portion of the perimeter adjacent to Indianapolis Avenue, and along each side of the yard, north and south, for a minimum 100 feet that meets the landscape planting requirements of buffer type F. And I believe that's 6 trees and 15 shrubs every 100 feet, if my memory serves me correctly. And again, if they go back to the aerial real quick, that would be anything that would be along this frontage that faces Indianapolis Avenue, where there obviously is not a building, and then 100 feet down to each side, again, just to try to reduce the visual impact of what you will see driving up and down Indianapolis Avenue. And number four, that the applicant meets all applicable stormwater detention and water quality requirements of the City of Lebanon Stormwater Ordinance. And I wanted to make sure that was included. They would have to do it anyway. But certainly if they're expanding the storage yard to the back, if they disturb any more than a half an acre, they have to meet all those stormwater detention requirements. And actually, a typical civil engineer would tell you that even if it's gravel storage, which actually is not permitted, but even if it was gravel storage, that is not a pervious surface. So they'd have to meet all the detention requirements, which the previous applicant was working to do anyway. So they would have to go through that process and make sure they meet all of our stormwater ordinance requirements, because there are some drainage issues out here that would need to be corrected. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
I have a few, Ben. Can you leave that exhibit up? So in the other exhibit in our packet,
Yes.
they show the current outdoor storage, kind of in a magenta color, which is off the back, kind of the northeast quadrant of their current property. Then they have office buildings and another parking lot that I believe, it looks like it's part of their current property. There's a small area of trees and then vacant land, and then the Reynolds property.
Yes.
That area with the stand of trees, I wish I could point to it, but just keep going back toward the existing.
Oh, these here?
Yeah, that area there, does that get tied in somehow, or does that stay as is?
I'll let the applicant address that. I know they'd shown two different examples that was in your packet. One that they did not include that, and one that they did. So I'll let the applicant address the different scenarios that they're potentially looking at for that outdoor storage yard.
All right, can you expand on where you were talking about the drainage and disturbance and that kind of thing? Because the back of the Reynolds lot here looks like about half of it is developed for their current use.
Yes.
And then the other half, it looks like it still has vegetation cover on it.
Yes. Yeah, so the stormwater ordinance, anytime you're disturbing more than a half an acre, you have to meet the stormwater detention and water quality requirements. This area back here that's in grass now represents at least a couple of acres. I think it's close to 2.5 acres. So if they were to want to pave or gravel in that area, I'm not sure what their proposal is now. We're just talking about the use tonight. But if they were wanting to put a different surface in that area in order to use it for storage, that would then trigger the stormwater ordinance, which would mean that they would have to detain and release water into either a storm sewer or into some sort of regulated drain. I believe actually it would go to a city storm sewer. The closest manhole is actually north of their existing property up. It's probably just off the map up here, up by the intersection. So they would have to run a storm line along the back of the property up to that manhole up there to release the water from some sort of detention facility that meets our stormwater ordinance requirements.
So is it safe to assume, and it's probably a question for the applicant, but when they talk about outdoor storage, people could effectively outdoor store on that undeveloped land without putting gravel down?
No, we could not.
Could not?
We would not allow parking on anything but an approved surface, which right now approved surfaces would all be hard surfaces, asphalt, concrete, pavers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Other questions? Kent, would you care to come forward?
Good evening. My name is Kent Franzen. I'm an attorney at 225 West Main Street, Lebanon. With me here tonight is Jeff Dickerson, who is the manager of operations and engineering for the Boone REMC. Ben, I think, explained the application pretty well. The REMC is growing in customers and expanding its physical needs. It owns the property at 1207 Indianapolis Avenue, which is one site removed north of the John Deere dealership location. This property adjoins the John Deere location. If you pull that map up, you can see this is the REMC's current land here, and this is where they currently have their outside storage at the back of the property. And the property that in question is adjacent to the REMC. So one of the attractive features of this 7-acre parcel owned by the Roberts family is that it would allow access to this space here without having to take trucks and equipment out on Indianapolis Avenue. They could just access it from the back because it is contiguous. The wooded area that was referred to earlier by Mr. Perry is on the REMC property currently. That's where they have their geothermal system installed. They cannot do anything with that. They can't build on top of that. They can't tear those trees down. They wouldn't have any reason to. So that will remain as is. The plan is to use the back, currently gravel area of the John Deere dealership as a site for future expansion. The opportunity exists to purchase this property now. The REMC doesn't need it today, but they're afraid that in 5 years or 10 years, they may very well need a bigger site and would force them to go entirely off campus and find new property. So what they'd like to do in the short run is just start locating some of their vehicles. They have, as you may know if you've been out there, they have transformers, they have poles that are too big to be stored inside. They have large pieces of equipment back in the secure area at the rear of their property. And they would be able to start moving some of that down to the south campus, south location, if this project was approved. They've entered into a contract with the Roberts family to purchase the property, subject to getting the necessary zoning approval. They would need a variance from this board in order to use the property as they anticipate. And the PBC zoning and the thoroughfare ordinance would not permit typical outside storage. The irony of the whole thing is there is a lot of outside storage along that road. The REMC has outside storage. The Boone County Highway Department probably has more outside storage than any user in the county, and they're just down the road a shade as well. So it's not going to stand out. It's not going to be something that will be noticeable and impact the development of the area up and down that corridor. The REMC is certainly willing to work with the staff in coming up with the landscaping, the buffering, the mounding, and the fencing that Ben described. The difficulty with it today is we don't know exactly what we're going to put where. And so what we'd like to do is ask your approval for authorizing the staff to determine where they want the fencing, where they want the mounding. We have to be able to get from our property to the Roberts property. So we wouldn't want to just mound this entire area where then we can't get access to the very piece of land we want to get access to. So there's going to have to be some cuts in there and some arrangements made to provide security and provide access and to provide visibility, to block somewhat the visibility. We don't know what's going to happen with electrochemical coatings property there, which is in between our property and the John Deere dealership property. It's, of course, an eyesore. It's been an eyesore for years. Hopefully that will be taken up someday and the site made developable, and maybe the RMC at some point would be interested in purchasing it if somebody else hasn't got a plan for using it. But that's the situation. The only consideration really we're asking for is we hold off on exactly where the fencing should be and exactly what the mounding should look like until we start to use it. And then because until we start putting stuff out there, it doesn't make any sense to start putting up fencing and then find out, well, we're going to have to move the fence because now we want to come in here, or we want to place something here. We might use this building a bit. It's not a very functional building for our purposes. The dealership building is kind of chopped up, and it's not in a condition that we could really use it very well. Maybe some small parts and equipment could go in here. The building in the back is actually better. We could use that building for some vehicles, could place a few vehicles in there. But we're sorry that we can't be more specific about what exactly we want to do. We understand this area back here is going to have to remain off limits unless we get further approval from this board and the Stormwater Board. We don't anticipate needing that in the foreseeable future. If we do, then we'll have to obviously do whatever the stormwater folks require, whatever you folks would require for using that property. But we think the current area that is in gravel is more than adequate for any medium-term use that the RMC might want to make of the property. So at this point, we're just asking for a use variance to permit us to expand our current operation. If you've been there, you've seen it, it's attractive, it's some trees. You drive down Indianapolis Avenue, you do not see the stuff in the back very easily. You've got to be looking for it. It's blocked and secure, and we would anticipate doing the same sorts of things with the Roberts property if we're successful and if we're able to purchase it. We anticipate, we have a contract to purchase it, but we've got to get confirmation on environmental, and we've got to get confirmation that we can do it and meet the drainage requirements of the Stormwater Board, and we haven't been before the Stormwater Board as yet. We have an engineer working on what might be required for stormwater compliance issues. With that, Jeff is happy to answer any questions you might have, or I am, if I can, and we appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Can I ask you to go back to the, can we turn the overhead back on? Do you have, I understand the geothermal part in the trees and the stand of trees isn't going to go anywhere, but conceptually, how do you connect those storage areas as you've been discussing, just conceptually, using that parking lot?
Yes, this is our parking lot right here. This is the south entrance to the RMC, and this is a parking lot back here. And this is the Roberts property right here. So we would just put a drive right through here. They would provide access to this property behind the Reynolds facility.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a public hearing. Anybody from the audience care to speak? I'll open it up for the public.
I'm Russell Roberts. I own the property we're talking about at the present time. When we decided to sell this property, the RMC showed some interest at first, and then we had some other things that came up and environmental issues, and they weren't sure about what was going to happen and took their contract off the table. And then we worked with this other agency for a while, and that didn't fan out. So we went back to RMC, and yes, they're still interested. So we've been working with them, and we feel like it's a good fit, that they've been good neighbors, and we feel like they will be a real asset to the community and that on Indianapolis Avenue, and will do what's whatever's necessary to make that property attractive and use it in a way that would not be objectionable to anybody. I don't think any neighbors or anybody driving by. So I'd highly recommend that you consider giving the variance they need to go forward with this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Gary Powell. I'm the broker on the property, and we have always wanted REMC to be interested in that property, and very pleased that they have finally come to a contract. We feel that the professionalism of that organization, their relationship with the city has been phenomenal, and that the continuance of that relationship with a variance from you to let them go ahead and start doing their construction and engineering would be beneficial not only to the property, but to the city as a whole. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing.
Then I have a question
Yes, sir.
on this fence. So are we going to, tonight, just look at 1, 2, 3, and 4, or are we gonna leave out 2?
I don't know. Let me read again what I said. I don't know that it's specific enough that it would restrict them from the way they're intending to use the property. What I'll have to do is work with them. If they're just using the existing storage yard, we certainly still want the landscaping and fencing across the front. If they're intending at some point maybe to expand to the back, we find something that's a little bit more temporary to the back. I'm assuming they're gonna want a secured yard, so they're probably gonna want a fence all the way around it anyway. But we'll work with them in terms of making sure that we're not restricting their access to the property by putting a mound or landscaping in the way of a drive or something like that. Excuse me. But I don't think the condition we've put in there would restrict their ability to do that necessarily.
All right. Thank you.
Ben, in my time on the BZA, I haven't seen something like this come up where it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
We, as a city, obviously, great, it's great to have the REMC here, it's been great to have the dealership there and such, and it sounds very open that this can be fluid, but is that, the city is comfortable with not having it defined like we would normally see it?
So I would say that the only request tonight is to be able to use it for outdoor storage. They're not asking to vary from any other standard of the ordinance. So no matter how they start using it, they're going to have to meet the standards. So they have an existing area that they can use to store. We've got some conditions placed on it to require fencing and landscaping around the area they intend to store. If they ever intend to expand that storage yard, then they have to meet all the standards of the ordinance for that as well. And I think the conditions on the fencing and landscaping would run with that request, even if they were to expand the storage. So I'm comfortable with it that way because our ordinance standards will cover us.
Without them having to move stuff?
Right. Certainly, we're not going to ask them to put landscaping or mounding in a place where they might
Figure out how they can
expand.
best
Yeah.
utilize this, and they know that we know that there's variances to be adhered to in that, but let's figure out what the use is going to look like. To me, it just seems, it's not impossible to do, but it's in backwards of what we usually see, or what I've seen sitting on the BZA, is that these things are defined ahead of time.
Yeah.
But we're comfortable, the city is comfortable with, let's work with an existing commercial entity that's been really good to the city to figure these things out and keep it fluid.
Yeah, and I think the conditions, they're specific enough to know what needs to be done in terms of screening the area, but they have some flexibility to them. So if the storage yard moves or changes shape or something like that, we can manage that. So yeah, I think with the conditions in place and then the other standards of the ordinance, I think we're covered pretty well. And certainly with the way those conditions are placed, they couldn't start storing anything out there until we've addressed the screening requirements.
Thanks, Ben.
Conditions.
Anything else for Ben or the applicant? Thank you. Back here to make a motion.
I would make a motion that we approve docket number 19-39, following the staff, the four staff recommendations as listed in the report.
I would second.
Kelly?
Gordon Perry,
Aye.
Bruce Polly,
Aye.
Ron Edwards,
Aye.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Motion carries. Congratulations. We have any other business for tonight? Since nobody's speaking up, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned until the January 6th meeting.